Hey everybody, welcome back to the Connection Project. You're here with Sally, and I'm here with an amazing guest I'm so excited to introduce today. I'm here with Suzanne Chabot. Shetler. I always feel like I say your last name wrong.
Yeah, people want to leave out that L. I think it's just
I
humans
always
trying
want to say, I always like, oh, I should know
to
that.
litter.
But yeah, that's my day. That is my day. So I'm just going to be completely honest about that. So who's ever listening into this session, it's just one of those weeks and days. So I'm just going to name it so I can just get it out of my system. So yeah, I'm here with Suzanne, and she is a registered nurse and a licensed marriage and family therapist, actively working in the health field for over 20 years. She has experience in both nursing and counseling, and has informed her framework as a holistic mental health provider, which is so needed, right? We can probably all agree on that, anyone listening to this podcast. Over the years, she's had the pleasure of working in a variety of milieuses, including outpatient community clinics, inpatient psych units, and private practices located in both central New York and Manhattan. She has an in-person and a virtual practice. She's worked with a wide range of clientele, but her primary areas of expertise are helping folks who work through relationship difficulties, navigate life cycle transitions, as well as eating disorders and intimacy disorders, love addiction, all the things that sometimes people don't want to talk about, but are occurring all around us and probably sometimes closer than we want to say. She works collaboratively with her clients, utilizing somatic therapy techniques, narrative therapy as her foundation, while also interweaving from the models of DBT and attachment theory and the Gottman method. While not formally certified as a Jungian psychoanalyst, she's personally invested and actively participates in multiple trainings and uses this in her practice with dream analysis and archetype integration. So that's a mouthful, but like
Nice.
super
Good job.
exciting for me because you know, how I know Suzanne, we've worked together for years in a hospital setting. So I don't know her as intimately in the therapy setting, but she recently left her full-time hospital job as a nurse to really commit full-time to her practice, which she was doing both, which I used to be like, holy crap, how can she do all that? But she was doing it, and now she has just made the change in the past year, and she'll probably talk a little bit about that. But I was really intrigued because I was really wanting to dive in with her on what she's doing in her practice, because mental health, and she can talk more to this, but I feel strongly a lot of different things in my backgrounds, and I suffered with my own anxiety and things like that. I've talked about multiple times on the podcast, but mental health, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, everybody don't get crazy, but it's my opinion that mental health, we're just not doing a great job in mental health in this country, right? And so there's still, I think we've gotten better, but there's still shame. Listen, I go to therapy with my husband. I'm pretty open about that. And I don't think he'd care that I share that. We've been doing that for quite a while now, because our communication was not like clicking, and we wanted to get to that next level. I think personally, everybody should have a therapist, a coach, someone that they're working with to try to work through their stuff. Life is hard, man. And so we need this. And what I love and can't wait to get into with Suzanne is all these holistic modalities and these, it's just not, doesn't sound like just straight talk therapy with what she's doing in her practice. She's really infusing it with a lot of beautiful techniques. Some I know about, some I am not that familiar with. And so I think treating the whole person, whether we're a nurse or a mental health practitioner, therapist like this, is so important, right? Mind, body, spirit. We have to connect to get all of us to that next level. So that's kind of my thing about this. And so I'm so excited to welcome Suzanne here today. And we're going to talk all things connection and what she's doing in her practice, and like, what does that even mean to her connection? And yeah, so welcome, Suzanne. I'm so
Thank
excited to have
you.
you here.
Me too. I have so many ideas like swirling around in my head about connection, but listening to you talk about your work as not just like not as a career, but personally, like your work on yourself,
Yeah.
right? And I really feel like that's where connection really that's the foundational piece, is working on ourselves in order to be able to connect with other people, places, things, the earth. is how we connect to ourselves. And I personally know that my experience and my work on myself over the years in therapy and 12-step programs, like that has made me to be such a better therapist in so many different ways. I mean, one is I can relate to other people as a participant, as a client myself. I can relate to other people working on um, the modalities of a 12-step program and what that looks like to really take a look at yourself and open yourself up in a different way, um, which in and of itself actually is anybody that has been involved in a 12-step program, because there are countless, they're all modeled after AA, but I mean, there are countless. It's a spiritually based program, but it's also based on the fact that we're not alone. Like other people are sharing a common experience, and like
Mhm.
you're connecting with other people in a way where you can truly be vulnerable. Because it can be really scary depending on what it is what's bringing you to wherever you're going. Same thing with a therapist. Um, so
I love that.
that
I
work
just want to stop you
really
there for
helped.
1 second because I love that
Yeah.
because I do think for me, um, in nursing, I think some of my experiences made me a better nurse sometimes. And then in my coaching practice and the holistic modalities I'm bringing to people, I'm not a therapist, coach, different, fully aware of that. But what I'm bringing to people are usually only things I've experienced myself that have helped me. And I think then, as you were saying, you're so much more connected to the whole process. Um, on what you're doing with them and what you're bringing forward to them to see if that's going to be a good fit for them, because everybody's different, everybody's made up different. And then having that faith, which I didn't have, until I started my spiritual journey. I was raised Catholic, but I wasn't really practicing anymore. I didn't have a lot of faith anymore. And so I have a more spiritual based feeling about things. And it does open you up to thinking about things differently. And it just it does create this feeling of community and that you're not alone. So I just wanted to mention that for our people. That's a really good point that you just made in all those aspects. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Spirituality is a whole other
Oh yeah, we
ball.
could we could go on and on about that, I'm sure.
I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic too, and that's been a challenge ever since I graduated from parochial. I went parochial all the way through pre-K to 12th grade, and then um, initially I went to college to major in neuroscience and biology, which essentially was just like a fancy pre-med major, which didn't go as planned, as that happens. And I ended up majoring in psychology and thinking I was going to minor in religious studies because I just was interested in a lot of different religious courses of all different religions, philosophy courses that fell under that umbrella. And I took so many that I just ended up double majoring. Like I just had enough. Um, but that also added to a lot of questioning of like, well, what do I really believe?
Mm,
I'm still like working on that. That's just like
me too.
incredibly challenging. So, um, yeah. And I think that people, when they look for somebody like a coach or a therapist, they look at people's profiles that resonate with them. So I feel like the people are already drawn to us, even though we're not physically connected yet, or like haven't even had a conversation yet. People are looking to connect, like with something. Like this
Right.
person fits within something that I can like connect with and feel safe with. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think
And
that people don't want people that are perfect.
no,
They may think they do, but I don't think they
not
do.
in, not intellectually, they don't,
Right.
you know. But I think there is maybe that idea of this person, like, I hope this person fixes this
Mhm.
problem,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, yeah. So I
is
guess when I said that, I don't think, yes, they want us to fix, they want the problem fixed, whether we're in the hospital or we're doing what we do outside of that, what you do in your therapy practice. They want the fix. But I think sometimes it isn't, for me anyway, I can speak for myself. It's intimidating for me to go to someone that I think has it all completely together. Like I want them to fix my problem, but I don't want them to be so um out of my reach almost, I guess, that I feel not that I can't be vulnerable. So I think
Yeah.
it's kind of a nice like a mix there, and maybe you were going to get to that about being energetically kind of, pulled to certain people.
Yeah. I mean, in order to really feel, because therapy can be really, I mean, for therapy to be of benefit, it's like this dichotomy of you need to feel safe and connected, but you also need to be able to be willing to have a lot of discomfort because you're usually coming for a reason, right? You're coming to navigate change or to change yourself. And so even though that might be something that's healthier or like that you inherently know you need, it's not going to be comfortable because change is like change travels with loss and it can be scary. So that is to be able to have somebody in front of you that like I don't feel like they're judging me, like I feel like I'm being witnessed and heard and understood, but they're still challenging me. They're able to accept like and sit with somebody challenging them.
Hmm.
Makes it easier. The defenses aren't like up so high that they can't actually like shift towards that change.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I noticed too, like speaking to the somatic work, right, and the holistic work, which is as a nurse and just what I'm like experientially myself, it's something that I know is important. And I'm like, in some ways, I practice very easily. And then some ways, like in my own therapy, when my therapist pushes me to do some sort of like mindful, even if it's just like sitting in my body for a minute, that's not necessarily comfortable. It is off-putting to people,
Hmm.
even me, who is somebody that like prides herself in somatic work. Like sitting there, somebody there with you. I mean, I feel like part of it is we're not used to doing that.
Hmm.
It's not like a knee-jerk reaction, a lot of it, a lot of these practices. And it's also like a space of vulnerability. Like you're putting your guard down in a way where you're like just sitting and like being quiet and like breathing or doing some sort of visualization. You're like, ooh, like there's not this buffer of like chit
Sure.
chat or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like that I'm
I
used to.
yeah, I literally was just talking about this. I most of the people know I do breath work. I've talked about that. And so I do a lot of breath work that's like big in my mission right now and getting people into their body and somatic work. But someone was breathing me the other day. It's one of my clients actually that's training to be a breathwork facilitator, one of my virtual clients. And so I've been signing up with her because she's doing her practicum hours. And so I got done this week and it was a very short session because we were tight on time. And after this session, I said to her, I don't know, it just came to me. And I've thought about this before, but going on what you just said, like it is so vulnerable to have someone watching you breathe, like, because this was virtual. I did it in person last night. And so people, it's a submissive pose, right? People are on their back, they're
Yeah.
closed their eyes in Old Forge last night where I did a session, it was dark. We have like little candles, but on virtual where someone's just watching you. So I was laying there and I was thinking, like I was feeling, even though I facilitate hundreds of people, I was thinking this is so intimate and
Mhm.
vulnerable, but I felt okay with it. I felt comfortable with her. But I was kind of naming it for her, like to her too, like this is such an intimate space
Yeah.
that we're asking someone to be in. And even though I know it works and it's beautiful, if someone's ready, and they feel safe enough to do it, but that's why some people are like not ready, like they're just not ready. And so, yeah, I just said this to her. It's so intimate. And she's like, intimate. Why do you say it's intimate? I said, really, it's when you really think about it, like you're watching me, I'm breathing with my eyes closed. I'm laying on my back. Like it's just so intimate. I'm having thoughts or moving my body a certain way and it's beautiful, but it is very intimate. Like there's a lot of times we don't aren't that intimate in our own family. Yeah, so I don't know, I just
Yeah.
to say that because it is, I 100% believe, understand what you're saying. It's such an intimate, vulnerable position to be in someone's office and slowing down or doing something like that. So yeah, and we are
Yeah.
not used to that.
We're not. And like that was probably a powerful thing, even if she was just like taken aback that you spoke to it and like recognized that. Like
Yeah,
you were
she
experiencing it because then people go like, you know, it's not like you're just asking somebody to do it and you should just do it.
right.
Uh, knowing that it's like it's simple, like these are simple things like breath work, but they're also very challenging.
Hmm.
So it's both.
Right. It's holding the duality of both for them and giving people permission to have, and when I facilitate, I do a very trauma informed in the sense of, I give people sovereignty over their own body. Like I'm guiding them, but I have a whole thing that I talk about. Like I'm guiding you, but do what feels good. This may be the first time you're even connecting with your body in this way. And now you're a room full of people. I name all of those things, and I've known how intimate it is, but for some reason in my session with her, being the person facilitated and a short session, I was just like, wow, this is like so amazing, but it really is so intimate. Like I
Mhm.
knew it, but I just felt like I had to like almost like talk about it with her and be like remind myself on it was a good remembrance for me on how intimate the somatic work can be with people and meeting them where they are. Because everybody's not ready for that, I guess. That's what I'm saying. So how do you
And
see that in your practice? Because you're doing a
somatic,
lot of beautiful stuff, sounds like.
I would say everybody is a case, it's like a case by case, you know, very individualistic. Somatic work, I utilize different things, right? I utilize what I call a self-soothing toolkit for some folks to just start with. They come in with a lot of anxiety and a lot of like relational reactivity and you know having a hard time not really being able to calm down and come into a conversation in more of a grounded way where it's productive. So it could come in all forms. But the self-soothing kit really taps into each sense. And I'm not a big fan. I know that there is this like common grounding exercise where it's like five things you see and four things you smell and right? Just experientially, anecdotally, I don't think that that's helpful because that's a lot of stuff all at once. And people are less likely to actually do that
Hmm.
consistently. So I break that down essentially and say, okay, for you, like a sense, like visual, what is something that you look at that is soothing for you? What are some of those things? What are some things that are soothing to touch? What are some things that are soothing, like that you smell? Go through all the senses. Some of those things can be layered on top of the other, but what I tell them is, and like sound, I'm a big fan of like playlists, podcasts, things that they can implement that are like realistic, right? Like, but then also the layering of implementing a new ritual or a routine, right? So, for example, I always give this example because it's a good one. When we already have something down that we do on a daily basis, like brushing our teeth in the morning, most people do that. So if you can find something that's already established and then put something on top of it, like taking a pill when you brush your teeth, if this is a new medication. So it should be playful. It's homework. It's tricky. Some things on paper might be like, oh, I could do that. I could do breath work. I could practice this or that. And then they try it and it's really not sticking.
Hmm.
So I encourage people to play around with it intentionally when they are feeling fine. So it's more of a routine when you're fine and it's preventative. So then when you do get upset, you're more likely to tap into it. Like
Hmm.
it's just like, because if you are just like, oh, I have this toolkit and I'm just going to keep it in my back pocket. And then when I go from 0 to 180, I'm not going to think to do that. I'm not going to think to use these skills. So that's one thing that is a fairly consistent um like piece of homework that I give and work on with my clients and then, you know,
So it's
something
kind
that
of
we
like kind of like habit stacking.
Yeah.
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 I didn't really ever, I don't know. I mean, I was kind of aware of that, but someone was just recently talking about that to me. Habit stacking,
That's
trying to,
probably the same. Yeah.
yeah, because
Probably the same.
your habit is the brushing the teeth, and now you're going to put something right, with that. So
Yeah.
you're already doing it. So it kind of reminds you.
Yeah.
And I can use that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the rituals are really great. I use those a lot. But I agree with you. It's really easy to, if it's too complicated, to just say forget it,
Mhm.
or just and just not do it. So yeah, yeah, nice. And how do
Yep.
people respond to the somatic work and the different kind of types of work you're doing, the holistic approach versus just straight talk therapy?
Some people take to it better than others.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just simple grounding. There's simple, if I have a couple in front of me and somebody's really getting tense and um the Gottmans use the term flooded for like when you're activated in fight or flight or, you're parasympathetic or sympathetic. Um, I might just speak to it and like encourage them like to breathe with me and just like open their palms or uncross their legs and just give them a minute. I mean, that's just like a very brief example. And even that in and of itself is a challenge for people. Like they might kind of like giggle and like not really actively take a deep breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like that's not comfy, right? And
Yeah.
I'll just do it with me, like I can see you're still really tense, or then I'll have them, and even if it's virtual, I'll be like, I can't really see below your chest level, but I would venture to guess your hands might be clenched. So I just like encourage you just to like open your hands. So it could be simple things like that. I utilize some polyvagal work, which I think is a good way to intertwine um, cognitive, like head stuff with the
Hmm.
body, because a lot of people, it's a good like bridge. It's like it bridges the gap sometimes for people that are like really very much like, I just need to do this work, like this stuff up here. And I'm not really interested in my body and like, or my emotions. And I just need to like get over it. And so it's like the redirection back to, okay, well, you can't just get over an emotion. It's there and it's going to go somewhere. So we need to digest it in some way. So um, I have also no choice but to adapt to the person sitting in front of me and how much, and how far they're willing to go and work in that area. And I have some people that are very, very into this more somatic, polyvagal, like connecting all of these things together and bringing in examples of how they have like navigated some of these skills in like their relationships and at work and
Yeah. I think I know it's all kind of the rage now, but I do think I think it really is it's been pretty amazing for me. Um, but yeah, I just see it when I'm doing different things with different people too. It's just, they really have to be ready. Um, or their body has to be ready. They might even be ready in I've noticed too, I think sometimes people are ready in their mind, like, oh, I want to do this. And then they get there, say to a breathwork session, and
yeah,
I don't see them again. And so I say that to people now, like, your body will just kind of decide. Like, your mind might have a little fear, your ego might have a little fear, but your body will kind of let you know, like, is this something I want to do again? Or is this something, like, don't have too many expectations, especially for a breathwork session on the first time, because I had a bunch of newbies last night in Old Forge, and you just don't know, like, you're taking them to a place. And so you want them to be somewhat comfortable and be able to, like, tap out if they want to. You don't want anyone to feel like it's not something that they have to go through with. Because that kind of how a lot of us have ended up here, right? Like, we weren't comfortable, or I wasn't taught to be comfortable with my emotions, right? If I had a dollar for every time I was told, oh my God, she's crying again. Why are you crying? Right.
yeah.
So then it becomes, that's not the norm for, like, we're not feeling like they were able to do that or even process our emotions. And so here we are, in this kind of hustle masculine driven society where, and it's served a lot of us, right? We became a lot of, especially women, have become very successful leading that way. But it stopped serving for me personally. It stopped serving me after a while, because my body got tired and was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. Um, and then my mind took a while to catch up to like what's really happening. So,
Yeah.
do you see a lot of that? Like people are just like all of a sudden, I don't know, I feel disconnected from
That
like
they feel
life.
disconnected.
Yeah, that they feel disconnected from like just in general life, their partners and
Sometimes it takes, I feel like the disconnect or a rupture or like a crisis that is either um something that has like usually outside of their control, right? It has either happened to them or maybe that some of their behaviors have gotten out of control and now this has caused this crisis,
Mhm,
whatever that may be. So it could be anything from an eating disorder, which taps into like wanting to disconnect from somebody, your own body, right?
mhm,
Um, and I feel a sense of like, I don't have control, to a betrayal. And it could be somebody that has done the betraying and is coming in trying to understand themselves. It could be a couple. It could be somebody that has been betrayed. It could be somebody that is not sure about who they are, whatever that means. It could
mm,
be somebody navigating their sexuality or their gender identification. So there is almost always a disconnect with the sense of self and like
mhm,
what's going on with me. Why is like this stuff that I've always been able to deal with, like I'm not able to deal with it right now, or I'm having panic attacks, or I'm disconnected from the people that I used to always be able to connect with for whatever reason. I'm retreating. Um, and attachment plays into it. I think that a lot of times people have this idea that attachment is like this static, set in stone thing from our childhood when it's not. It can evolve and it can change in either direction. And so when there is something like a betrayal or a breakup that is can shift even somebody that's very secure over into an insecure, anxious attachment style. And then it's hard for them to connect and really let down walls.
mm. Can you talk about
So
that a little bit more, the attachment, for our listeners, if they don't really know like what that means,
yeah,
or
yeah.
because I think that's important.
So I just try to do it in like layman nutshell terms. But it all started, gosh, I don't even know, I don't know the decade, Bowlby's attachment styles with children and their caregivers. And identifying through observation that these children, based on how the parents would respond to them, um, through observation of play and how the child would stay with the parent or be able to kind of go off on their own and play and come back and how the parent responded to them. Um, really identifying if that parent was attuned to that child's emotional needs and security. And if they weren't to a certain degree, then that child would most likely have an insecure attachment, meaning they might be anxiously attached, always afraid that somebody's going to abandon them, or they might be avoidant, which would be like, oh, they might feel like smothered and actually the kind of the opposite of
Hmm.
anxious. It could be a blend of both of those, which is really challenging to navigate as an adult if that's what you're struggling with. And or it could be secure. And about half of the population is insecure. It's not like an uncommon thing.
Hmm.
So I think it's important, just like that in and of itself can be taboo. Like, oh, these people are insecure. It's actually a fairly common thing. And just because you're secure when you're 20 doesn't mean you're going to be secure when you're 40.
Right. Right.
And so it started off with, oh, this is how, this is where it starts, which is foundational, yes, but these other really significant relationships in our life can impact our sense of security and relationship and our attachment style. And
Yeah.
usually people that are insecure doesn't mean that they can't be with somebody and have a successful relationship, but they blend and can be much more um successful in a relationship when it's with somebody that is secure, when you pair an insecure with a secure person. But a lot of times, anxiously attached people will be pulled towards avoidant. And then that can be really tricky if both people don't acknowledge that and have the insight to work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it is. It is. I think, well, I think it is. Just so people have like a little bit of understanding because so many times, or this is what I'm seeing anyway, is so many times, and this is for me, I was struggling in today's world, right? So many years ago, I was struggling like with things that were like, oh God, like, why is this happening now? But it was really from stuff that was really old and then stuff that trickled onto the old stuff and then onto the old stuff and then onto the old stuff. And although we don't want to always blame, you hear this sometimes, we don't want to always blame and we can't go back and change that. But I do think it is important to talk about like how we can in therapy and therapeutic situations um address these things, and it does help us to understand ourselves better. That's I think why I asked about the disconnect, because that was something that came up for me was I like felt like, and it wasn't one day, but I felt like it was one day that I was just like, who am I? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Like, I'm going to this place and I love my job, but I just felt like in my personal relationships and my job and everything, like, I didn't even know if you asked me a question, if I could answer it truly on how I felt because I had been chameleoning out, I guess, to like how I was supposed to do it or what I thought. And I see that a lot with the coaching clients, like people that are coming for stuff. I mean, it's like almost like you hear the same verbiage that I just felt like lost, or, a mom that has kids still at home. But so, yeah. And so I guess just speaking to that, yeah, some of this old stuff is, I don't
Mhm.
want to say fixable, but you're able to, when you become self-aware, then you're able to just understand yourself more, and then you're able to show up more for your partner,
Yeah.
for life, even even when you feel like
You
maybe
feel
it's
a,
not
a
going to
disconnect.
happen.
Yeah.
It's like you're like, oh, I can't dig out of this, but you can. And I think it's important to like talk about all these different modalities that you help people connect back, especially you do a lot of partner work, so that's always intriguing and challenging, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because you have two
I mean,
people in the room.
yes. Oh, yes. And sometimes families, which is more rare, but that's even harder when you have multiple people in the room, right? Yeah, I think that the disconnect with listening to you, when you have that moment where you're like, what's going on here? Like to question, like, am I being authentic? Like, what is like to authentically show up and like what that means? Really, again, it goes back to you. It goes back to like, well, what do I even know? Like, what are my values? What are my needs? What am I feeling? Like,
Mhm,
all of these things. And if you're not able to really even know, like, you can't even answer those questions
mhm.
off the cuff, which a lot of people probably can't, not all of them.
Right.
Um, there's still like this little twinge of like, but I'm not probably living, like, I'm not walking my talk necessarily. And so that can be a prompt to work on yourself and to question it, which it sounds like that's probably where it went, which
For
is why
me,
people
oh, yeah, yeah.
therapy, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah. I mean,
anxiety.
yeah, I'm honest about like when I went to therapy with my husband, he doesn't care if I share this stuff, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was all him. Of course.
Well,
I
that's
was like,
also very common.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, oh God, you got stuff and like you need to fix it. And yeah, then funny. Interesting. We went, and then that's when I came to the epiphany of like, I don't even know who I am. Like I feel very disconnected from myself. And that really started me to really connect with somatic work slowly, like, with therapy, with talk therapy, and then finding all these other modalities. And then, me being a coach and doing the work, and then helping people find the work, whether it's with me or somebody else. But yeah, but it's, for people listening, right? It's a lifelong, sometimes process. Like I'm not going to, I understand now I'm not going to undo 50 6 or 55 years of programming
Mhm.
in 3 years. Like it's just not going to happen. I've
No.
made a lot of progress. And I like to share because I want other people to know, like, yeah, there's other people out there that feel this way. They feel this disconnect. And when you start to connect and love yourself more, and you even understand what that means, because I didn't even understand what that means, um, then the ripple effect happens. Things with your partner get better. For the most part, like if you're doing the work, there's always differing. I mean, you can chime in on that, but that's what I've seen. And for myself, I showed up differently in my relationships.
Yeah.
Once I started to understand myself more, but I still work on that and I don't shame myself around it. I think that life is hard. And so we have to learn to really love ourselves in a different type of way than maybe we were even taught to do.
Yeah. I mean, let's see. I'm taking in everything you said.
Mhm.
Not knowing ourselves. There's a lot of things you can tap into. Like culturally, we don't just like talk about our emotions and our
Mhm.
vulnerable, or we kind of just plow through. But also like going back to the attachment style thing. So a lot of, not everybody, right? I am not a woman of absolutes, but like a lot of times when there is an insecure attachment style going on, especially if there's somebody that kind of has an anxious attachment style, that can go hand in hand with coming from a family of addiction.
Mhm.
And that family system breeds that type of attachment style, which also travels alongside being an enabler and codependent. And a characteristic of that is really being hypervigilant and knowing what everybody else needs and trying to take care of everybody else
Mhm.
except for the person that is doing all of that.
Mhm.
And so it's not a huge shock that you don't even really know, well, what do I really need? What do I want? What are my values? Because all I'm doing is like taking care of all this other stuff, even though I can't really control it. But that's where all my energy is going until something happens and I recognize that that's really not, it's not serving me. It probably served you at
Yeah.
one point,
Uh,
which usually that's how things
yeah.
start,
Mhm.
right?
I feel like,
Maybe
yeah,
it served you at
that
one
serves
point.
you and creates you to have these protectors, or like that served me to be very successful. But then, if when you start to look back, for people that are listening, when you start to realize, okay, this may ring a bell for me, or you start to work on yourself with a therapist or guide, whoever, um, you then find it's interesting because then you're like, oh, like I had a lot of signs, but the universe was definitely speaking to me. But for me personally, I wasn't listening. And I see that a lot with coaching clients too. And then you get into a bit of a victim mode because you're just like, I just need to do all this because that's my identity.
Mm,
Like I do, like I need to do, like I need to help everybody because that's what I do.
right.
That's what
Yeah.
everybody
And if I
expects.
don't, if I
If I
don't, they're not
don't,
going to love me, right?
right,
If I don't, they're going to leave me. So I
right,
want to get better, but then if I get better, what if they don't actually like what they see,
right.
which is terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're listening and you resonate with that, I mean, that is, so many people, like you are not alone, I guess is my the reason to talk about some of this stuff, because I think it's so important to talk about what's happening in mental health and with people, and what people are. And the reason that I share vulnerably is because yeah, there's always this weird feeling of like I'm sharing and then I look weak, but I don't feel that way. I think I have to, like, I feel the need to share openly because I just feel like it's okay because somebody needs to hear that, because sometimes it helps me to hear that other people, not that they're struggling, but that like you talked about in the beginning, that piece of community and the steps, and that you're not alone, whether it's with faith or with a community of people that are kind of struggling with the same thing, not to live in each other's agony, but really to figure out the steps to make, which is why I think it's so important for people to not live in isolation and to get themselves a good therapist or a good guide if they're struggling with something. And then finding that person that you really, like you said in the beginning, kind of connect with, because that's important. I have found it to be an important piece where you can trust and feel safe. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
not
mean,
judged.
that's the number one predictor of success in therapy is your relationship with your therapist. And you're like, if you do feel safe and comfortable with your therapist, chances are you're developing like a very healthy, secure attachment to somebody. And that is like a way to navigate and work on your attachment style.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I know we've been all over the place. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. That just
But
means I can come back now.
huh?
That just means I can come back.
Yeah, there's so many things because I wanted to talk to you about your dream stuff that you're working on and the archetypes, like how you bring that into your therapy sessions. Because I think there's a lot of interesting ways. I think when people think of therapy, they just think of traditional talk therapy. And I'm not, again, I am not against traditional talk therapy. I've been doing traditional talk therapy, couples therapy for a while now. So I'm not against that at all. I sometimes know think people need a team of people. Like if you've been struggling, sometimes you need you need people to kind of get you back on track. Like, and sometimes it's more than one person. Like that's how I
Speaking of
feel.
connection, when
Yeah.
you talk about a
Yeah.
team,
And that's
what
yeah,
makes that more successful? Connection with that team.
the community, which has
Yes.
come up in every podcast so far. Like it's called the Connection Project, with so much has come up about because I do think that the pendulum swings sometimes so far the other way, right? So it was all about this, and I've talked about this before, all about the fact that we um as women, like we don't need anybody else. I went through that. Like I can do it myself, and I did do it myself. But there is something that happens like that I was not wanting to connect. And then I think community, and we lived back in the day, right, in community space where you had a baby and there was community and they helped you, and there is something that happens there in the connection piece within community. Like I do believe it has to start with you, and then the community piece. I mean, what do you think about that? Like I think both are so important.
Yeah. And even now, even though we've transitioned to a different type of society, I think that can tap into being comfortable offering and asking for help. And people just, the mentality of I need to do it all, like very
Mhm.
individualistic, society where um Sue Johnson, who does emotionally focused therapy, she's a couples therapist, and she speaks to like this idea, which is like BS, which is we need to be very individual and independent. And she talks about actually, no, we're a society that likes, we need socialization
Mhm.
and we need dependence, but we need healthy dependence.
Right.
There's a difference between unhealthy and healthy. But to be fully independent is like that's a belief, but it's not like the reality of how
Right. And I
things
feel like
come
this pendulum kind of swung that way in a sense, because we swing it like it never like comes kind of in the center. And so I think it's so important for people to know, like it really is important. And then if you have some of these things that you're struggling with, it is hard to ask for help.
Mhm.
Because I just mentioned it, right? It's almost like a sign. I'm coaching people, and it's almost like a sign of weakness to some, but I don't think it is. I think it's okay to like talk about your stuff if that's comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Um and finding a community, a tribe of people that are going to help you and get to that next level of wherever you want to go to. So I know you have like time constraints today, but I have so much I want to talk to you about because I love what you're doing and I love that you are mixing what you do from the sounds of it with all your different therapies. And it sounds like, would you say intuitively you're deciding like with your couples or your people that are coming in, like what's going to work for them versus a script?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I pull from those like those
Mhm.
primary therapeutic models that you
Yeah.
describe in the opening. But yeah, it really is unique and it's collaborative. It truly is. Like I check in and see how, how they feel with certain things. Uh, you know, and there are times when, especially with couples, if they come in and somebody like they might not be speaking to being authentic and true, they might be a little worried that they're going to hurt their partner's feelings when they are really not in the same place in what they want relationally, their commitment level, or their willingness to do the work. And sometimes that's a little blurry, and we find that out later down the road. Sometimes it's pretty evident after a few sessions, and it, it needs to either be put on pause or the therapy needs to stop and there needs to be other areas explored. So it's I guess an example of like connection needs to be, sometimes disconnection is appropriate. Sometimes the ending of a relationship is appropriate. And it's being able to connect and communicate that. So people are not like not living in, for lack of a better word, a fantasy, right?
I was going to say La La Land.
You know, and
Yeah. Hmm.
it's painful. It's painful, but it's also like modeling, it's modeling what they need.
Hmm. I like that.
So I mean, that's part of connecting, right? Are you modeling for yourself? Are you modeling like walking alongside your values? Oh, it goes back to yourself though.
It does. It does. And so
100%.
what I always like to just make sure that when people are listening, like that piece to yourself, like taking radical responsibility for yourself. Like I like literally had to do a deep dive into myself and be like, shit, man, I gotta like take a hard look at myself before I blame like where I'm working or my partner or my kid or whatever the victim mode. I'm not saying that some of that stuff wasn't off, but I always have, we have choice and we need to be responsible for ourselves first and then be able to live in that community space of like, I need help or how can we collaborate? So I love that you just said like, it's a collaboration with your client, which is so important, right? You're checking in with them, you're intuitively deciding what they need. And sometimes you have to like get them to the place of it's not like this isn't going to work in the sense of you're not like ready to take that radical responsibility because the partners have to be ready for that. So I
Yeah.
love that. And yeah, so the disconnect is sometimes important, but then for them to connect back to themselves. And so it all stems back. But I love the work you're doing. And I would love to have you come back and talk about the archetypes and how you're like, I noticed that you're doing work on that and some dream work, which is so
Yeah.
interesting. So, what would you say to the listeners are the maybe two or three things that when someone is thinking about coming, right, to reaching out, because that is really a hard decision for people to make for the most part, I think. Um, and so what would you say to them when people are thinking about that or feeling that disconnect, reaching out to someone like you with all the amazing things you're doing in your practice?
Yeah. Well, I would say to recognize that it is courageous to just even do like an email or a phone call to reach out to somebody, to start off with taking the time to search for somebody that fits your needs, whatever those needs are. And you can start with an email and looking at their webpage if they have a personal webpage, right? Because if you kind of just, if it's all under the umbrella of, I need to connect with this person, what do I need to connect to this person? If you go to their website and it's off-putting, that's probably a sign to find somebody else. If you like that website and you feel like, this seems like something familiar and like comfy, soothing, reaching out and having a phone call with that person and really having like a conversation with them and get a feel for it. And to remember that it's not, you're also making a choice. Like that therapist is talking to you and you're having a conversation and you're feeling each other out and you're making that choice. And even if you're like, okay, yeah, like I liked that, how that conversation flowed. I felt comfortable. I'll make an appointment. Again, I tell my clients, this is like, you can break up with me. It is okay. If you do not feel comfortable, this session meeting does not mean you have to be here forever. And so there is, just be able to acknowledge that this is a choice and to, it's the first step. It is hard. And then also it's okay to say no and move forward with somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, courageous is definitely, I think, the word, right? Making that first connection, that first phone call, that first email is really, really hard for most people. But we're going to tell you it gets easier. It gets
Yes,
easier once you find that
it
person.
does. After that first conversation, first meeting, people tend, they can be very anxious. That is normal. And they usually, by the time they leave my office, they are much, you can tell physically they're much calmer and they
Yeah.
feel a release. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, Suzanne, thank you. There's so
Okay.
much more that I want to talk to you about, but I think for anybody listening, like reach out. Suzanne has a local practice. Do you just want to talk a little bit about your practice? I mentioned you in the beginning, and I know you have to go, but anything you want to say about, I'll share your info on the
Yeah.
podcast, how to get a hold of you. She does a lot of holistic and a combination of therapies, which sounds interesting. I think is what needs to be happening in mental health. Not that I'm the guru of mental health, but I think it's really beautiful how you're combining things. So thank you for spending your time with me today and for
Thank you.
everybody.
Honor. Yeah. So I'll just throw out my website. It's going to be listed though, like you said, in your
Yep.
info. If you go onto my website, all of my stuff is on there, my Instagram and all my contact information. Um, and I am licensed in New York State and New Hampshire. So I'll just throw that out there too. But the website is heartinhandtherapy.com, and heart is spelled HEART, in handtherapy.com.
Beautiful. So yeah, if you're thinking about anything, reach out, check out her website, her Instagram. She does lives on her Instagram. So yeah, check it out. And thank you everybody for spending time with us today. And get out there and connect with yourself first. Give yourself some love today. And I'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.